The wind howled over the jagged spine of the granite peaks, a sound like 1,000 mournful ghosts crying out for entrance into the world of the living. Here at 9,000 feet, the air was thin and sharp enough to bleed the lungs of a lowland man. Even in late December, the shadows of the towering pines held on to crusted patches of snow, refusing to yield to a sun that seemed distant and weak. Becket Cole stood knee-deep in the icy rush of Iron Creek, his hands numb as he broke the ice to let his cattle drink. The water was brutal, liquid ice fed by the glacial melt. Becket did not feel the cold, or rather, he chose not to acknowledge it. He was a man carved from the same hard substance as the mountain itself. He was 40 years old, though the war and the weather had etched lines into his face that made him look 50. A jagged scar ran from his left temple down into his beard, a souvenir from a saber at a place called Shiloh. He hauled himself onto the bank, the muscles of his shoulders burning. He was a big man, broad through the chest and heavy with functional strength. His cabin sat half-hidden on a rocky shelf a mile up the slope. It was not a home, it was a fortress against the elements. Inside, it smelled of wood smoke, cured leather, and solitary living. Becket trudged up the path. He needed a partner. Not a wife in the poetic sense, but another pair of hands, a body to keep the fire fed while he checked the herd. It was a cold mathematical calculation. The agency in San Francisco had sent a letter. The woman's name was Mai Lin. The letter was brief, written by a scribe. I am strong. I cook. I sew. I ask only for a roof and safety. It was a business arrangement. He steeled himself to feel nothing more than the satisfaction of a fence well mended. He needed a helpmate, she needed a shield. It was enough. 3 days later, Becket stood on the platform of the Silver Creek train station. The air was thick with coal smoke and the smell of unwashed bodies. When the train hissed to a halt, the doors opened, and passengers spilled out. Becket scanned the crowd until he saw her. She was smaller than he expected. That was his first thought. She stood alone amidst the bustle of miners and cowboys, looking like a vibrant splash of ink on a blank page. She wore a traditional cheongsam of dark blue silk that was hopelessly inadequate for the weather, and wrapped around her neck was a bright red scarf that fluttered in the biting wind. The townspeople stopped to watch her. A group of miners lounging on the porch of the saloon snickered. "Look at that," one whispered. The hermit ordered himself a china doll. Becket stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched. He walked toward her, his heavy boots thudding on the boardwalk. He loomed over her, a mountain of a man in a buffalo coat. She looked up, and her eyes landed on him. He saw fear in them, the skittish look of a trapped doe, but beneath it, he saw a jaw set in a line of fierce stubbornness. "You are Mai Lin?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. "I am," she said. Her English was accented but clear. She clutched a small carpet bag to her chest. "I am Becket," he said. He hesitated, then awkwardly extended a gloved hand. She looked at it, then placed her small, cold hand in his. "Wagon is this way. We need supplies. Storm's coming." He led her to the general store. The storekeeper, a balding man named Harrow, looked up and smirked. "Well now, Becket. See you got your package. Didn't know they shipped cargo from the Orient this far up." Becket placed a list on the counter. "Flour, salt, coffee, cartridges." Harrow chuckled, leaning over the counter to look at Mai Lin. "Bit scrawny. Hope she came with a return policy." Mai Lin flinched. The words hit her like a physical blow. She stared at the floor, waiting for Becket to join in, to agree she was just livestock. Becket turned slowly. He didn't shout. He simply leaned forward, placing his heavy hands flat on the counter. "Pack the flour, Harrow," Becket said softly. "And while you do it, keep a civil tongue. You speak of this lady with respect, or I will close your shop for good." Harrow turned pale and swallowed hard. "Just joking, Becket." "Pack," Becket commanded. He turned his back on the man and looked at Mai Lin. She was staring at him, wide-eyed. No one had ever defended her. Men had used her or blamed her. But this stranger had stood between her and the world's scorn without blinking. "You all right?" he asked gruffly. "Yes," she whispered. "Thank you." The ride up the mountain was brutal. The civilization she had known dissolved, replaced by rock and ice. When they reached the cabin, the sun was dipping behind the peaks. The temperature plummeted. "It is not much," Beckett said, opening the heavy door. "Roof holds tight. Fire draws well." My Lin stepped inside. It was one room, dim and stark. A narrow bed, a table, shelves of traps. "I will sleep on the floor," Beckett said abruptly. "There is a pallet. You take the bed." "You are the husband," My Lin said, the word feeling strange. "You are the one who is freezing," Beckett countered. "I am a hard man, My Lin. I do not have soft words. But I promise you this, I will never lay a hand on you in anger. I will provide the wood and the meat. I expect you to do your share. And I expect you to stay." "I have nowhere to run," My Lin said steadily. "I will do my duty." The days that followed were a brutal education. The mountain did not care that My Lin was city-bred. The cold was a constant enemy. She learned to bake bread in the smoke-stained Dutch oven. She learned to wash clothes in boiling water, her fingers turning red and raw. One afternoon, Beckett returned early to find her struggling with the axe near the woodpile. She was swinging with all her might, but the blade bounced off the frozen pine. "You are fighting the wood," a voice rumbled. My Lin jumped. Beckett stepped closer. "Your feet are wrong. If the axe glances, you will take your leg off." He moved behind her. He didn't take the axe. Instead, he reached around, covering her small hands with his large ones on the handle. My Lin froze. He was suddenly everywhere, a wall of heat against her back. He smelled of pine resin and tobacco. "Spread your feet," he murmured. "Let the weight of the head do the work." He guided her arms up. They moved as one. For a second, the awareness of his body pressed against hers was absolute. They swung the axe down. The blade bit true, splitting the pine with a clean crack. Beckett didn't move immediately. The silence stretched, charged, and vibrating. Then, as if he had touched a hot stove, he jerked back. "That is the way of it," he stammered, his face flushed. "I have cattle to check." He turned and walked away fast. Winter deepened. The snow drove horizontally against the logs. Inside, the cabin was a small island of warmth. They fell into a rhythm. She cooked simple meals of rice and venison. He repaired the barn. They spoke little, but the silence began to lose its edge. One evening, by the fire, My Lin stopped sewing. "You asked why I came," she said softly. Beckett looked up from oiling his rifle. "In San Francisco, there was a man," she said, staring into the flames. "Mr. Drake. He was powerful. He wanted me for his collection. He told me I had no choice. When I refused, he sent men to take me. I fought them. I used my sewing scissors." She looked at Beckett. "I hurt a man. I ran. I am a fugitive, Beckett. If they find me..." Beckett set the rifle down. He looked at the scar on his own hand, then at her. "You defended yourself," he said. "That is no crime in these mountains. Drake is a rich man. The law belongs to him." "Not here," Beckett said. "You are safe here, My Lin. I swear it." January brought a cold snap that cracked trees. On a Tuesday, the sky turned a flat, deceitful gray. Beckett was restless. "I have to check the herd in the lower ravine," he said, pulling on his coat. "I will be back before noon." "The air feels heavy," My Lin said, worry creasing her brow. "I am always careful," Beckett said. 2 hours later, the world vanished. A blinding wall of white erased the trees. Beckett was navigating the steep edge of the ravine when the ground beneath his horse gave way. It was a cornice, a shelf of wind-packed snow. Beckett fell. He tumbled through the brush, hitting the slope hard. He came to a stop 50 feet down, wedged against a fallen pine. A sickening snap echoed in his ears. Pain exploded in his left leg. He tried to stand and collapsed. The cold was already seeping through his buckskins, turning his sweat to ice. Back at the cabin, noon came and went. My Lin paced the floor. She looked at the white chaos outside. She grabbed the coil of heavy rope and the oil lantern. She put on her heavy wool coat over her cheongsam and wrapped the red scarf tight around her face. She stepped out into the storm. The wind nearly knocked her over. She pushed forward, her legs burning in the deep snow. She followed the creek line, screaming his name. Beckett! Beckett! She found his tracks ending at the ravine edge. She looked down and saw a dark shape half buried. Beckett, she sobbed. She tied the rope to a sturdy pine and slid down the slope. He was conscious but fading. His lips were blue. My Lin, he whispered. Go back. Not without you, she shouted over the wind. She tied the rope under his arms. I have to drag you. The climb back up was a nightmare. She pulled until her hands cramped into claws. She dragged him onto the crude traver he had left near the trail. She became a machine, putting her head down and driving her legs through the snow. She got him into the cabin and barred the door. He was shaking violently, his teeth chattering with the rattle of death. Hypothermia. She stripped the frozen clothes from his body. He was ice cold. She knew what she had to do. She stripped off her own layers until she was bare against the firelight. She climbed under the buffalo robes and pressed her warm body against his freezing one. She wrapped her limbs around him. I have you, she whispered. You are not allowed to die. Slowly, the violent shivering eased. His breathing deepened. In the darkness under the firs, the boundaries between them dissolved. There was no rancher and mail-order bride. There was just flesh and breath and the will to survive. When the fever broke 2 days later, Beckett woke to find her sleeping in the chair beside the bed. He reached out and touched her hand. She jerked awake. You came for me, he rasped. You were late, she said, her voice trembling. If I am alive, Beckett said, squeezing her hand, it is because you gave me something to live for. He pulled her down gently. Their lips met. It wasn't cautious. It was desperate and real. We are not just surviving anymore, he whispered. We are living. Spring arrived in a rush of meltwater. Beckett's leg healed, though he walked with a limp. The cabin had changed. My Lin had sewn curtains of yellow calico. It was a home. But the peace was shattered in April. A stranger rode into Silver Creek. He was a hired gun named Kincaid, dressed in a long duster. He went straight to the sheriff. The next day, Beckett and My Lin rode into town for supplies. The atmosphere was poisonous. Sheriff Brady stepped out of his office, flanked by Kincaid. Beckett, Brady said, looking uncomfortable. We have a problem. Kincaid stepped forward, holding a warrant. My Lin, he announced, his voice smooth and cruel. Wanted in San Francisco for grand larceny and attempted murder of Mr. Cornelius Drake. The townspeople gathered, whispering. I knew she was trouble, someone muttered. She is coming with me, Kincaid sneered. Mr. Drake wants his property back. Beckett stepped in front of her. He leaned on his cane, his hand resting near his revolver. She is not property. She is my wife. She's a criminal, Kincaid spat. Step aside, cripple. Beckett didn't move. You have a piece of paper. I have a Winchester and the truth. She defended herself against a man who tried to rape her. If that is a crime, then the law is broken, not her. I don't care about your stories, Kincaid said, reaching for his gun. Don't. Brady shouted. Kincaid drew. But Beckett was faster, even on one leg. He didn't shoot to kill. He fired a single shot that struck the dirt inches from Kincaid's boot, sending a spray of mud into the gunman's face. Kincaid stumbled back, blinded. Beckett stepped forward, jamming the barrel of his rifle under Kincaid's chin. "You listen to me," Beckett growled, his voice thundering through the street. "I saw fields of dead men in the war. I know what evil looks like. It looks like a man who hunts women for money. You go back to Drake. You tell him that my Lynn is a coal now. And if he sends another man, I will bury him in the ravine." He looked at the sheriff. "Brady, are we going to have a problem?" Sheriff Brady looked at Kincaid, trembling and muddy, then at my Lynn, standing proud in her cheongsam. "No problem, Beckett," Brady said, spitting on the ground. "Get this trash out of my town. Warrant's no good here." Kincaid scrambled onto his horse and galloped away, humiliated. The town was silent. Then, the storekeeper, Harrow, stepped forward. He took off his hat. "Mrs. Cole," he said awkwardly, "I have some fresh silk coming in next week. Thought you might like first look." My Lynn nodded slowly. "Thank you, Mr. Harrow." They rode back up the mountain as the sun set, bathing the peaks in gold. They stood on the porch of the cabin, watching the light fade. My Lynn pressed a hand to her stomach. "Beckett," she said softly. "My bleeding is late." Beckett froze. He placed his large, scarred hand over hers. "A baby?" "Yes," she smiled. "A son, I think. We should name him Thomas." Beckett pulled her into his arms, tears stinging his eyes. They had survived the winter, the wolves, and the past. They had found the only thing that mattered. "Thomas," he agreed. "He will know this mountain. And he will know his mother was the bravest woman who ever walked it." The wind sighed through the pines, no longer a mournful ghost, but a lullaby for the life beginning in the high country.